Ethan West was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. The West family owned one of the largest conglomerates in the country, everything from tech startups to real estate development. His father, Alexander West, was a visionary businessman who had built the empire from the ground up. His mother, Elena, was a formidable woman with a passion for philanthropy. From an early age, Ethan was accustomed to luxury. The finest schools, private tutors, and exclusive parties were all part of his world, but Alexander had a plan, one that Ethan didn't quite understand at first. He wanted his son to inherit the company, yes, but he also wanted Ethan to have the humility and grit that came with earning success, not simply inheriting it. So, one day, when Ethan turned 21, his parents dropped the bombshell: "Ethan, we are sending you to another city. To live like everyone else. You'll work, you'll struggle, and you'll learn the value of hard work," his father declared, his voice firm but not unkind. At first, Ethan had laughed. The idea of being a normal person was laughable to him. But his parents were serious. They wanted him to move to a small, modest town several hours away, where no one would know who he was. There, he would get a job, live in a humble apartment, and face challenges like the rest of the world. They believed this would build character and prepare him to take over the West Empire someday. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed, although he could hardly imagine life without the comforts he had known all his life. Living in a new world, the transition was nothing short of jarring. Ethan went from luxury to poverty overnight. The apartment he moved into was tiny and run down, with peeling paint and cracked windows. He had to take a job at a local coffee shop, serving customers who barely gave him a second glance. His once perfect wardrobe was replaced with second-hand clothes from a thrift store. At first, people treated him with indifference. He was just another struggling young man in the city, blending in with the crowd. But soon, he began to feel the sting of judgment. His refined manners, impeccable speech, and hesitance to engage in the rough and tumble of daily life made him stand out in all the wrong ways. There were whispers. People who looked at him like he didn't belong. He overheard co-workers snickering behind his back, mocking his attempts to learn how to use public transportation. He felt humiliated by the condescending comments of the regulars who came to the coffee shop. They made him feel like an outsider, a rich kid pretending to be poor. Ethan was, at times, ashamed of his background, though he couldn't bring himself to tell anyone the truth. One person who saw through the surface was Ava. She was a local girl, a sweet, kind-hearted woman with a soft smile and an air of genuine warmth. She had grown up in the city, and her family had always been well known, though not as wealthy as some of the other elites. Ava worked as a nurse at the local clinic and spent her free time volunteering. She was grounded, and she didn't care much for status or wealth. One afternoon, when Ethan had spilled a tray of coffee cups all over himself, she stepped in to help him clean up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something clicked. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make a mess," Ethan muttered, embarrassed. "You're fine," she said with a soft laugh. "It happens to all of us." They began to talk, and over time, their connection grew. Ava was different from anyone Ethan had met before. She didn't care about his awkwardness or his strange mannerisms. She simply saw him as Ethan, the guy who was kind and tried his best. He found himself falling for her, but there was one problem. Ava's parents were not so fond of the relationship. "You're not good enough for her," Ava's father told him one evening, his voice cold. "We've worked hard to make something of ourselves. You don't even know what hard work is." Ethan tried to explain, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he? They didn't know the truth. How could they understand that he wasn't really the poor, struggling guy they thought he was? The hidden truth. Ava's family wasn't just concerned about Ethan's lack of wealth, they didn't even know the full scope of his true identity. What they didn't realize was that the very company they worked for, the firm Ava's father had spent years building, was, in fact, a subsidiary of West Industries, the company Ethan's father owned. The entire town, including Ava's family, was unknowingly working under Ethan's umbrella. But Ethan hadn't told anyone. He kept his true identity hidden, even from AVA.AS. The months passed, Ethan grew more and more miserable. The job, the isolation, the constant judgment, it was wearing him down. And then, just when things couldn't seem worse, disaster struck. A crisis that changed everything. Ethan fell ill. It started with a simple cold but quickly spiraled into something far worse. His body, worn down from stress and neglect, wasn't able to fight the infection. He collapsed at work one afternoon, and the next thing he knew, he was lying in a hospital bed, delirious with fever. Ava, ever the caretaker, was by his side, holding his hand. "You need to tell me what's going on, Ethan. What happened? Why are you really here?" At that moment, in the midst of his feverish haze, he could no longer keep up the charade. With a weak voice, he finally confessed, "I'm not who you think I am," he whispered. "I'm Ethan West, the son of Alexander and Elena West. The company your father works for, it's mine." Ava froze, her eyes wide in shock. She pulled back slightly, as if the words themselves had struck her like a blow. You're lying. You can't be." But Ethan was too weak to explain further. As his fever worsened, his parents, who had been monitoring his progress from a distance, finally got the call. They rushed to his side, and in that moment, the truth came to light. When Alexander and Elena arrived, the entire town of workers who had once treated Ethan like an outsider was shocked. They learned that the poor, struggling young man they had all known was, in fact, the heir to one of the wealthiest empires in the country. The aftermath. Ava was devastated, torn between her love for Ethan and the reality of his family's power and wealth. Her parents were furious, feeling betrayed by both Ethan and their own daughter. They didn't understand why she would want to be with someone so far above her in status, but Ava, after much thought and heartache, came to a decision. She realized that it wasn't Ethan's wealth or status that mattered, it was the person he had become during his time in the city. He had lived among the poor, struggled, and tried to understand what it was like to be one of them. She loved him for his humility, for his kindness, for the man he had become, not the man he was born to be. Though her parents continued to disapprove, Ava chose Ethan. Together, they confronted the challenges ahead, both with the looming weight of the West family legacy and their own hearts, which had found each other in the most unlikely of places. As for Ethan, he realized that his parents' tough love had given him something money could never buy: perspective. He was now ready to take on the empire, not as a spoiled heir, but as a man who understood both the beauty and the burden of responsibility. And no matter what the future held, he knew that Ava would be by his side, the one person who truly saw him for who he was.